Many of you asked me to talk about Yellen's warning about Bitcoin being extremely inefficient. This comes from a person who has done nothing for the world except print money and have very loose monetary policy. I think she's a terrible person, absolutely terrible person, and we somehow can't get rid of her. She's at the central bank, and then she goes to the treasury, and she has a lot of nerve to criticize Bitcoin, in my opinion, especially when she says that it's a very inefficient way to conduct monetary transactions. And when she says it's a highly speculative asset, here's the quote: "It's a highly speculative asset, and I think people should be aware that can be extremely volatile, and I do worry about potential losses that investors can suffer." This is a chart of purchasing power. This is somewhat, I would say, understates the loss of purchasing power. Nevertheless, you can see that if you just held a dollar, what it bought you in real world terms has gone down over time. This is the real problem with fiat currencies, especially when you have people who like to do a lot of quantitative easing, people like Bernanke and Yellen and Jerome Powell. Also, when Yellen talks about Bitcoin being very energy inefficient, for example, this is what Bitcoin energy efficiency looks like. You have a bunch of Bitcoin miners. The way the US dollar is energy efficient or inefficient is you have lots of giant aircraft carriers that drop bombs on people, kill a lot of women and children in the process. So for someone like her to criticize Bitcoin when she's completely destroyed the dollar with her money printing, and to ignore the fact that the biggest user of crude oil in the world, for example, is the U.S. military. U.S. military is used to keep the shipping channels and the trade channels open. This is how the fiat system works. The nice thing about Bitcoin is it doesn't require all of these bombs and all of these aircraft carriers, which are obviously not that great for the air or for the environment. I like this quote from VJ again. Janet Yellen needs to apologize to Bitcoin holders for her fiat privilege. That's a pretty good hashtag. Powell, in many ways, is much more honest. In his testimony yesterday, he said that there's definitely a link between Fed liquidity and asset prices. Obviously, there is. This is why the stock market is pumped and Bitcoin is pumped during a time of very sluggish economic growth, all the problems with the pandemic and the lockdowns, and yet we're close to new highs on the S&P 500, the QQQs, Bitcoin, etc. Of course, there's a link between money printing and asset prices, and this is what we've been talking about. And this is one thing that Yellen doesn't mention when she criticizes Bitcoin. When you print a lot of money, you increase wealth inequality in a very artificial way. You pump up asset prices, and at least Powell has the honesty to admit it, or maybe he made a mistake when he admitted it. I also don't think that Janet Yellen is a true threat to Bitcoin, and I'm going to explain why in this video. These are the comments that have been freaking everyone out about how Yellen saying that Bitcoin is used mainly for illegal financing. This is just simply not true. There have been many recent studies. The amount of illegal transactions in Bitcoin used to be much higher. They're now somewhere below 1% the last time I saw the numbers. Bitcoin is a completely open, transparent ledger. If you want to launder money, if you want to engage in illegal activities, you're better off doing it with suitcases of US dollars, simply because Bitcoin, you can do chain analysis on it. And if you have any real world data on someone that you can link to a public address, you can follow the path of that Bitcoin. And many people have gotten in trouble this way for doing illegal activities. So I'm not sure Yellen believes this. She's not a very good person, in my opinion. But I would suggest that the main use case of Bitcoin, it's not to launder money or anything like that. As I said, illegal activities on Bitcoin are a very small percentage of it, or less than 1%. The main use case of Bitcoin, as we've talked about on this channel, is to hedge against the absolutely insane policies of the Federal Reserve, of other central banks, of the federal government, of the U.S. Treasury, where Janet Yellen now sits. This is the main use case of Bitcoin. If we had a good form of money in the US, if the US dollar were a real form of money, if it were a form of hard money, we would not need Bitcoin. So this is the great irony, and maybe it's not an irony, because if you are a central banker or you're of this mindset, you could see why they might not like something that is unregulated, that's free, and that can pass across borders. That being said, my basic argument I'm going to make here is that Janet Yellen is and always has been in the pockets of the big bankers. Here's a recent article showing that Janet Yellen has raked in more than $7.2 million in speaking fees from Wall Street. This is the person who's going to supposedly make the Treasury much better for the little guy in America. I don't think so. She's a Wall Street crony. She's part of this system. She's never worked a productive day in her life. The economics she studies are completely bankrupt and wrong and have no relationship to the real world. You can't print yourself to prosperity. And so what I would suggest is that this is a bad thing, obviously, but it might be a good thing in the fact that she basically is beholden to Wall Street because Wall Street likes Bitcoin now. And if she comes after Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies too hard, she's going to get in trouble with her corporate masters. Give you a perfect example, BlackRock now getting into Bitcoin. BlackRock, one of the largest asset managers in the world. Actually, I guess it is the world's largest asset manager at this point, even bigger than Fidelity or Vanguard. They are getting into Bitcoin. Is Janet Yellen really going to tell Larry Fink that he can't get into Bitcoin? Now, Larry Fink recently, at the end of last year, suggested that Bitcoin could evolve into a global market asset. In some short list last year, Larry Fink, who's the head of BlackRock, the CEO and founder, was actually floated. His name was floated as someone who could be a political advisor to Biden. Larry Fink's a lifelong Democrat. If Yellen goes too hard against Bitcoin, don't you think she's going to get a call from Larry Fink and these other Wall Street firms that are just starting to move into Bitcoin? Wall Street has a longer time horizon. It takes a lot of time to deploy money, to get permission to do everything. With the OCC allowing banks to custody cryptocurrencies, PayPal being allowed to sell cryptocurrencies to its customers, and then all this institutional money flowing into Bitcoin and into other cryptocurrencies, this suggests that Wall Street thinks this is not going to be reversed anytime soon. We do live in a plutocracy. We live in a kleptocracy. We don't live in a democracy anymore. Wall Street, the central bankers, these are who are really in charge. And whoever's president, if it's Trump, he's got all his Goldman Sachs advisors there. If it's Biden, he's got all his Wall Street people as well, including Janet Yellen. They just put a different figurehead, but the policies remain the same, which is huge amounts of deficit spending, huge amounts of money printing and monetizing of the debt. Right now, Wall Street loves Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, and they're not going to let Janet Yellen tell them what to do. Larry Fink is much more powerful than Janet Yellen.